Check. Hi, I work with Maria on the SB 50 committee, and last weekend I attended a meeting in Windsor Square to meet and greet with Richard Bloom, who's an assemblyman for an adjacent area. I was at a private home, and it was very nice that Wally Knox volunteered his home. We got about between 80 and 100 people there. And interestingly, most of the questions were probably not of interest to the valley. They talk about loss of kelp, movement of the beach sand, and a number of other topics that were not germane to this area. Finally, we got around to SB 50, and it was the last question, and I asked it. And as Maria said, this is sponsored by Scott Wiener. Now, Bloom is a Democrat, same party as Wiener, who is chair of a number of committees. And Bloom made the point that he has legislation that has to go through some of the committees that Wiener chairs. So there's considerable leverage that is being exercised in Sacramento for and against the bill. And what Bloom said, and this is usually what people say at this point in a bill's life, he opposes it as written, but if it's changed, then he might support it. So, and as Maria said, this shatters the American dream of having and living in a single-family home, and we have to keep putting pressure on these political people to step up and have the courage to vote against it. Thank you.
Thank you. Before Nancy speaks, next after Nancy, any deputies that are here will introduce themselves. But let's go with Nancy and then John Eisen.
After the deputies. Hi, everybody. Happy New Year. Welcome to SOHA 2020. Good to see everybody. My name is Nancy Segoyan. I'm a board of director. I'm a member of the board of directors, and I'm also the membership chair. I'm up here to speak with you about how important your membership is, because it's critical, but I'm going to segue for just a second to piggyback on what you just heard. What Maria said and what Marshall said, we cannot overstress how important it is that every one of you who care about your neighborhood and your street and preserving, the way most of us grew up in those neighborhoods. It's not just a house, it's a community. That's why we're all here, because Sherman Oaks is a community, and single-family neighborhoods create community. So please, take the pink one, follow up and share it with a neighbor. Make sure somebody else does too. Thank you. I'm going to take the hat off and say, we cannot tell you, we cannot overstress. So, thank you for being a member. How many of you here are members? Bless you. Thank you. You are our lifeblood. You make this possible. You are the wind beneath our wings. You make all of us able to be here tonight to work to make Sherman Oaks a better place. And that's what SOHA does. We work on developments to minimize negative impacts. We work on transportation issues. We beautify. We work with our electeds. And we just do so many things that, and you may not even be aware of all of them, but we work hard. I can attest to it. And we need your support. So please, if you're a guest, raise your hand. I will come around with this. Thank you. We look forward to your support, and it means everything to us and to your community of Sherman Oaks. Thank you.
Please. One.
Hi everyone, my name is Milan. I'm Councilmember David Ruse, Sherman Oaks Field Deputy. Happy New Year to everybody. I hope the decade is off to a good start. So a few updates I have to share with everyone. First, tomorrow, Burbank Boulevard is going to be resurfaced from Kester to Van Nuys Boulevard. And then thereafter, they'll also be painting an eastbound bike lane from Kester to Van Nuys on Burbank as well. This won't be taking out any traffic lanes, so traffic patterns shouldn't be significantly affected, so no worries. And currently right now the city is working on closing the bike path gaps in the San Fernando Valley to make sure that the bike paths are easily accessible for everybody. Secondly, next Tuesday, January 21st, is the Sherman Oaks homeless count, and that'll be held at our Sherman Oaks District Office at 14930 Ventura Boulevard. It starts at 6 p.m. They always say it ends at 11, but kind of ends at midnight, for being honest. And I cannot stress how important this count is. It is essentially how the county determines where they're going to be allocating resources. So it's really important that we get the numbers right, so we make sure that Sherman Oaks gets the resources that they deserve and they need. And we do need volunteers, so if you are willing and able, we will feed you and give you pizza and soft drinks, and you can register at theycountwillyou.org. Lastly, or second to last, very excited to announce that Councilmember Rue was named the Assistant President Pro Tempore of the LA City Council yesterday by Councilwoman Nuri Martinez. So he is now the third highest ranking city official sitting on the city council, and he's also the first Korean American and the first Asian American to serve this role. So we're very excited to continue serving Council District 4 in this new capacity. And finally, I have brought a lot of these. This is our 2018-2019 annual report. Our office works really hard to put this together every year, and it's essentially a snapshot of what we've done in the district. And if you flip through it, it's broken down by neighborhood, so you can see what we've done in Sherman Oaks. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Okay, John and then Tom.
In September, Maria Calvin, Jeff Calvin, and I volunteered in South Central Los Angeles for a party for the homeless. There's going to be another one on the 1st of February, Saturday, February 1. If anyone is interested in joining as a volunteer at this event, see me after the meeting. Thank you.
Why was it significant? Why did it make a difference to you?
It was an opportunity to do something directly for homeless, to interact, to feed, to talk to, try to get services to see on the ground what is actually happening and can happen. And so you see firsthand what can be done and experience it.
Thank you, Tom.
I'll be quick.
You done?
Yeah, I'm really done.
Put a fork in.
Technology.
I know, isn't it amazing? Okay, hi, I'm Tom Glick, board member. I just wanted to let people know that the city is conducting 2 workshops for the Orange Line Transit Neighborhood Plan. That is basically Costco area, Van Nuys Civic Center, and North Hollywood. They're proposing transit neighborhood plans, which are essentially a densification of those areas. Closer to my voice, I'm sorry. My voice is already loud enough. But they're conducting 2 hearings or meetings. One is on the 22nd of January, next week, a week from today, at the Browdy Building from 5 to 8. And then the second one is on the 30th at the Amelia Earhart North Hollywood Library at the same time from 5 to 8. I encourage everybody to attend because with regard to SB 50, these are the true plans that the city is working on to actually densify around the transit corridors. So this is where the vision of the city should be going when we talk about increasing the density and intensity around these transit. They're also doing it in the West Valley and the Purple Line. It's not a new thing, but it's part of the city's process. They've got an MTA grant, and I encourage everybody to attend and see at least what the city is doing. Again, I can give you the information after the meeting.
Thank you. If you want more information, please talk to Tom. As Ron is coming up, the board of directors, if they could just, I kind of figure out where you all are, stand up and introduce yourself, starting with this section. Oh, wait a minute. Jules, the guy that does a ton of work. Jules Fair.
Bob Anderson.
Marshall Long.
Tom Glick.
Chuck Betts. I'm Matt Epstein.
Okay, let me introduce our main speaker this evening. City Controller, which I consider one of the most important positions in the city. The City Controller has the ability to audit, to bring in professionals or use the staff to see if your tax money is being used efficiently and effectively. The city has a budget about $9 billion, and it's primarily tax money, property taxes, and grants, etc. So if anyone is going to find out what's being done wrong, it's going to be our speaker, Ron Galperin.
Good evening, everybody, and happy 2020. As you mentioned, I am Ron Galperin. I'm a controller of the city of LA. Sometimes I joke that I perhaps have the most deceptive title of all of the elected officials in the city of Los Angeles, in that I do not get to control everything. It's perhaps aspirational. I also remember when I got elected, my mother said to me, may she now rest in peace, finally a title to go with your personality. There was a little bit of truth to that, dare I concede. But it is the job of the controller to be the independent watchdog for each and every single one of you. And as you know, there are 15 council members in the city of LA, but there are also 3 citywide officials. The mayor,
You have to come back here.
You have to come back here?
Because we're getting feedback.
Aha, okay.
Stand in the middle.
Why don't you try this way?
Let's see. How's that? Is that better? Yeah. Is that better? Okay, great. Okay. I didn't want to have like a separation between myself and everybody, but alas, here we are. And so you mentioned that we do auditing, both financial and performance audits. We also do the financial reports for the city. And also I do payroll for the small little intimate group of 50,000 people who work for the city, as well as distribute the billions of dollars that we make in payments to our vendors for goods and for services. And we also have a waste, fraud, and abuse unit. And since I took office, what we also did was really branch out into open data, and we created the city's first open data site. And what I want to do with you in the few moments that we have together, and then open it up for questions, is to share some of the resources that we have in the controller's office that we've made available to each and every single one of you, as well as some of the things that we are working on. So I'm guided by what I call my 3 T's. This just briefly gives you a sense of what the framework for my work is. And that is about transparency, it's about trust, it's about transformation. And my goal was to make the city of LA the most transparent when it comes to how it is that we spend our money. We used to rank at the very bottom by organizations that do that kind of rating. Today I'm pleased to say that we've been winning awards repeatedly because we put it all out there for everybody to see. And we put out not only the raw data, but we are doing it in all sorts of dashboards, and we're developing even further dashboards, both for internal use as well as for everybody else to see. All sorts of different reports, all sorts of different visualizations, and a lot of mapping, which I'm going to share with you as well. The second is about trust. And let's face it, people don't often feel very trusting in government. And government does not always necessarily engender our trust. And we are living in times, particularly when you see what is happening on a national level, where there's a tremendous amount of distrust. But I also really believe that we on the local level have the ability to try and get beyond some of that politics. Because fixing potholes and trimming our trees and providing necessary public services and public safety should not really be about politics. It should be about public service. And so we on the local level have the ability, and I think the responsibility, to try and rise above it all and to try and really deliver those services that we most intimately depend upon. And when you think about it, we pay a lot of attention to what happens in DC, and with good reason, but our lives are most intimately affected by what happens on the local level. And the third is transformation. And our lives and the way that we're leading them is changing at breakneck speed. The way that we communicate with each other, the way that we get our goods and our services changing radically. And we in government have to adapt and also change in many radical ways, because people do not want to anymore have to, let's say, get on the phone and wait on hold for a whole long period of time and then maybe hear back. You want to be able to do it on your app. You want to be able to do things in a much more easy way in how you relate to local government, and you want local government to relate to you in that way. So we created the lacontroller.org. This has all sorts of different information on there, as well as what I call the control panel, and that's where we have all the data of the city, the virtual checkbook. So the last 10 years of spending, every dollar that we spent is searchable. You can type by word, by vendor, and find out every single dollar that we have spent. Budget information, including how we are performing when it comes to that budget, where is the revenue coming from, payroll, including the details of payroll for each and every single person who works for the city, payroll period by payroll period, and all of the various components of their pay. Next slide over here, this is the data catalog. I mentioned you can see it in raw form. You can even see how many people are interested in each and every single one of them. I mentioned the data catalog, the virtual checkbook, which is the next slide. I'm kind of running through this quickly because I want to make sure that we have time for questions. You can also see, as I mentioned, every item that we get. Now, in addition to that, the city has something like 700 funds. All of you have heard of the general fund, right? But in fact, we've got a special fund for just about everything imaginable. We've got now 40 columns of data about each and every single one of those funds, what's going in, what's going out, what's committed, what's not committed, as well as the name of the individual in the city responsible for that account, and their phone number, and their email. And I urge you, use it, because it really helps you become much better advocates. Our financial reports, and we're going to skip ahead a few slides here. Our financial reports also are usually the size of a phone book. It's called the report for Wall Street, but we also have our report for Main Street, and we've made it a very interactive financial report. And I promise you, it is fun, it is colorful, it is enjoyable. And if you go online to our site, you'll be able to learn a lot about how the city spends its money. You'll also be able to see each and every single one of the audits and reports that we've done. Some of the ones that I'm highlighting over here are turning over a new leaf. This was actually looking at our tree maintenance program and how it is that we can and should develop actually an inventory of each and every single tree, because you're not going to have money to trim every tree, but how do you actually have an inventory? You can do it on your phone now even, and there are cities that are doing this, and we now have somebody in the city of LA that we've hired to do this, where you can also even use artificial intelligence to determine the health of that tree, and which ones are the ones that need most attention, so that we can actually start using our money a little bit more wisely, a little bit more effectively. This one over here was called Room to Grow. This is looking at all of the various 29 different departments that have one program or another relating to youth, but it has not really been tied together, and I made some recommendations for how to do that better. This one, it only takes a spark. As you can see, we all know about the tragedies that have been happening with much greater frequency when it comes to fire. And if you look at the greatest fires that have happened in California over the course of the last couple of years, almost all of them are related to human beings. They do not just happen by themselves, and they happen in many cases because of electrical power lines. And so we looked at what are the DWP's liabilities, what are the ways that it can do a much better job. Pleased to say that there are changes that are happening. not overnight, but ones that are going to take some time to really help mitigate that risk and to reduce. You cannot eliminate the risk of these wildfires, but if you can reduce them to some extent, that is absolutely vital. Some of the other reports that we've been doing are looking at the issue of homelessness, which I believe is the #1 issue that we are facing in our city. And there's a lot of wonderful things, a lot of things that I'm proud of about how the city is doing, but I believe that they are all imperiled, quite frankly, if we do not get a better handle on how to address this crisis. It's interesting, there was a recent poll that showed 95% of Angelenos answered that they thought that homelessness was the #1 issue that was facing LA. And that was amazing to me, because I don't know that you would even get 95% of people to agree that the Earth is a sphere and that it revolves around the sun. And the fact you get 95% says something really significant about just how much it is on everybody's mind. And I will be very frank with you, I've been quite critical of how the city has been handling it. There are a lot of people with good intentions, and we've been spending a great deal of money. But the question is, what have our results been? So one report was looking at LAHSA, which is the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, which has outreach. And I was looking at what are the criteria for that outreach. Is it being effective? What are the things we are reaching out for? And it was, again, one of these rather critical reports with a number of different recommendations. I'm really hoping that city leadership takes it seriously. There is now a change of leadership that is about to happen at LAHSA. And I think there are some real opportunities to also just look at its whole structure and whether it is, as it is currently constituted, the right way and the right approach to so many of the things that it's been called upon to do. Moreover, I did a report, and many of you may have seen it and may have read it, looking at Triple H. This is the $1.2 billion bond measure that was approved by voters now more than 3 years ago, again, with great intentions. The idea to build 10,000 permanent supportive housing units. However, very few of them, a minuscule number, actually just a small number opened now 3 years later. The costs are averaging in the mid-500 range and up to $700,000 a unit. I am extremely, extremely upset, extremely troubled by that, because if that is what your cost is to build per unit, you will never have enough money to make an adequate dent into this. And so the kind of recommendations that I've made are, how do you first of all not make the perfect the enemy of the good? And how do we look at some temporary solutions, imperfect though they may be, in terms of helping to people to get off the street in the more immediate term. We have 1,000 people, let that sink in, 1,000 people who are going to die on our streets this year. That is unacceptable. That is criminal on the part of our city and of our county to allow people to be dying on the streets in those numbers. And so, yes, we need more housing, and we need more permanent supportive housing, but we also need more bridge housing. We need more mental health facilities. We need more safe parking areas that are organized, safe tenting areas. And I can tell you all the problems with each and every one of these other alternatives, but I believe that many of them, and most of them, are better than the current state of affairs. And while the city has made some progress, the problem continues to multiply. And so I think we have to be much more creative and much more nimble and really take a good look at how it is that we are spending our money. So that's a little bit of a look into the issue of what is happening when it comes to homelessness, as well as a report that I issued about how do you have the right balance, and it's a complicated one, of how do you offer lots of help, but also how do you have some reasonable enforcement, but enforcement in a way that actually helps everybody, because nobody is being done a great service by the way that we are approaching it right now, and certainly moving people from one side of the street to the other and then back to the other side ain't working. What I've been doing a lot of is mapping, and I really believe in the power of maps to tell a story and to help guide public policy. And so we map just about everything you can imagine as a way to really inform and to shape policy. Everything from, we mapped LGBTQ resources for youth, Interestingly enough, if you look at the homeless population that we have and the young people who are homeless, a very large number of them are members of the LGBTQ community. So how can we provide them with the information that they need on their phones? Because, by the way, the vast number of people who are experiencing homelessness actually have smartphones. So how do we use that as a way to actually reach people? Looking at all various youth programs, there was one on parking tickets. It actually maps a whole year's worth of parking tickets where you are most likely to get a parking ticket, and what kind of ticket that is most likely to be, what you are most likely to be paying for that ticket, and essentially where you should avoid. The number one type of parking ticket that is out there is for street sweeping, and we have a bunch of recommendations that we've made for how, again, do we utilize technology. Because you should be able to, for example, get a text message, the street sweeper is coming. A text message, the street sweeper has left. A sense on your smartphone that this is a place I can park, this is a place I cannot park, or your time is about to expire, or your meter is about to expire, you want to add a few dollars to it. And it should be, the idea of getting about parking tickets is not about creating revenue. It is really about how do you create a sensible way and opportunity for people to park. And so how do we use technology in a better way? We did also free tax prep mapping, show you some others. By the way, this is a map that we have that's in real time that is available. Most people don't know that we have it, both for LAX and Van Nuys. It tracks all the planes that are landing and taking off in almost real time and their decibel levels. You'll notice these little circles there, and there's a number attached to that within that circle, and that actually has the noise level in decibels of that particular piece of aircraft as it is landing and as it is taking off from LAX or from Van Nuys, meant to be informative, but also as a way to think about how do we envision a better public policy, because we, of course, want to protect our neighborhoods from noise. At the same time, we know how important the business of flying is to our economy and to our well-being. So how do you look at that data in a way that helps you make better decisions based on the age of those planes, based on a variety of other factors that impact noise and ultimately quality of life of people?
Why aren't you tracking Burbank everywhere?
Well, we do not have the data to track the Burbank Airport, although it would be nice to be able to do that at some point. We're able to do Van Nuys and LAX because we are the city of Los Angeles, unlike the city of Burbank. But it's something that I think would be great to do. I'm trying to find out whether they have a similar tracking mechanism or not. Let me show you a couple of other maps here as well. We mapped, by the way, all of the summer fun free city programs in LA. We do a lot of great stuff that, by the way, each and every single one of you pay for. That is free. Would be nice if you knew about it. And now you can actually click on a whole series of color-coded dots to find out what in your neighborhood can you do that is free. It ranges from social services to senior programs, to youth programs, park programs, you name it. And we are keeping that updated on a regular basis as well. One of, I think, the most important maps that we put out is what we call the property panel. And the city of Los Angeles is the largest owner of real estate in the LA area. We actually own about 7,500 distinct parcels within the city of Los Angeles. Now, some of them are little tiny slivers, some of them are unbuildable, but some of them are also, and some of them, of course, are our parks and wonderful municipal buildings, but we also have a rather wide-ranging portfolio of commercial, industrial, retail, parking, you name it. Properties that may be put to their best use, some of them which may be underutilized. And I think we really need to take a look at those very carefully in terms of particularly opportunities for homeless housing, for low income, for senior housing, for a variety of other things that can really help in terms of community development and improving our neighborhoods. So what we've done here is now map every single government-owned property in the city of LA. So that would be property that is owned by the city, by the county, by federal government, by LAUSD, by Metro. We have color-coded it, and here is actually a snapshot of Sherman Oaks. There are 143 of these publicly owned properties. in the Sherman Oaks area. Again, they are color-coded. You can click on each and every single one of them and get additional details on who owns that property, what the nature of that property is, what it's being used for. You can get the satellite view and street view, among other things as well, because we integrate it with Google technology. This is all about how we can empower each and every single one of you and empower those within the city to really utilize these vast and incredible resources that we have in a way that does the most public benefit and public good. I'm now in my second term as controller, very blessed to do a job that I love to do each and every single day. First in my family to be born in the United States. My parents came to this country with that American dream for their kids to create a better life, and thankfully they were able to do that for myself and for my sister. I'm now trying to pass that on to the next generation. We actually just had twins who are now 4.5 months old, and the most adorable babies in the world, but I'm a little bit biased. My desire is, how do we create that better community for the next generation and for the next generation after that? I'm really honored to be with you here this evening. There's so many things you could be doing. You could be watching Netflix or whatever, but here you are at a community meeting, really caring about the present and the future of Sherman Oaks, but of the city as a whole. And so with that, I'm going to say thank you and open it up to you for any questions that you want to come up with. And thank you so much to the board, the fantastic board, which does a great job.
So the question format is different than we have been doing in the past. If you guys were here last meeting, we're actually addressing the microphone to you guys to actually ask the question. I think that's yours.
Is that me?
That's you.
Ooh. Okay.
So if I don't ask your question, it's because I don't have it. We have only a few questions here today. So I'm going to ask every question. And if you do have another question that you think you want to have answered tonight based on what you've heard, just these are on the back table or the side table over there. Just bring them up to my side, and I will go ahead and address. So we have only 3 questions because you're doing such a great job. Only 3. So two of them are actually homeless questions. Okay. And the first question is going to be Philip in the back. Tom, Philip, stand up. So there was an article in the Los Angeles Times today, which Phil will address. But this also, there was an article and there were some news stories today on Governor Newsom actually going to the counties throughout California and going to the county fairgrounds and having them do an inventory of their facilities to start housing homeless. So, Phil, do you want to ask your question?
My question has to do with an article that was in today's paper, but I've been driving past the St. Vincent Hospital for 25 years. I work downtown. And that hospital is just ideal, both in proximity to, homeless and in its, configuration itself. There are people, supportive housing doesn't do what a place like St. Vincent can do, which is offer 24-hour institutional care. But the article went on to say that there's no money for it. I guess bond didn't address or addressed only supportive housing. But it's unfortunate you can't take advantage of something like that. And then we had a bunch of stores that closed. The one right over here on Sepulveda was 6 acres. And there was an ideal opportunity for the city, throughout the city of LA, to be proactive and take, go and at least try to get ownership or some type of lease program. So I'd like to have your comments on that.
Sure. Well, first of all, I think as we all know, there are many reasons that people are experiencing homelessness. Part of it is, of course, the cost of housing, but it's also about mental illness. It's also about people who have experienced a tremendous trauma from physical and from emotional abuse. It is drug use, it is mental illness, it is the unavailability in many cases of really good mental health care in the United States generally. There's a lot of reasons why we have homelessness, and so there's not one source nor one solution. But I also want to step back for just one moment and talk about how we got here. And I often think of it in terms of the road to hell is kind of paved with good intentions. And those intentions can go bad. For example, many years ago, during the Reagan administration, there were mental hospitals. Most of those were closed down. Now, they were often very cruel places and terrible places to be. But the idea was we were going to create other opportunities in the community for people to be who are experiencing mental illness. That never happened. And so many of those people are just kind of out there without any kind of real help. You look at how Skid Row came to be. This was, again, with good intentions in many cases. How do we take an area and concentrate a lot of public services in one area to help people in a concentrated area? But it also created a culture, and it created an environment that has become tremendously toxic. We also have environmental laws in California, extremely well-intentioned. And at the same time, it's also made it difficult to build the number of units that we need to keep up with the demand that we have. So there are all of these kinds of different factors that many of these had good intentions, but then you look at what the result is. Another being, by the way, a focus on permanent supportive housing, which I happen to believe in very much. At the same time, it's also come at a cost of creating some of those more temporary housing situations, or temporary stopgap measures that will at least help get people off the street or help alleviate some of the suffering. And by the way, think of any of us in the sense that we may be so-called well-adjusted psychologically right now, some more than others, but if you spend just a couple of days on the street, unable to take a shower, unable to use a bathroom, what is that going to do for any of our mental states? We would not be at our very best either. And so how do you provide people with an opportunity just for basic hygiene, just to wash up? So to answer the question, I know it's a long answer, but it's one that I'm giving you a long one because it's, I think, the most serious issue facing the city of LA. That we need to look at those kind of opportunities. How do you take, for example, a hospital site that is underutilized and use that for mental health care? How do you redirect some of the resources that we have to some of those needs when it comes to the more acute care that is necessary? And how do you also take some sites and open them up for some sort of organized tenting and places where people can take showers and do laundry? I'm all for it.
Okay, so Laura Ashtor, can you raise your hand? Okay, Tom right there. So while Tom's going over to her, she's got another question about St. Vincent Hospital. But I just want to give a commentary that maybe the city needs to start looking at the private sector. I have a good friend of mine who's built 1,500 units in and around universities at $50,000 a door, brand new facilities at $50,000 a door, and he cannot get anybody in the city of Los Angeles, as far as any electeds, to even listen to him because he's a private he's a private citizen, and he's not a union as far as the city unions. $50,000 versus the $500,000 to $700,000. He's doing it right now, and he's profitable. So the city might look at the private sector if they want to solve this problem. So,
Matt, real quick, the controller brought a bunch of wonderful staff here today, and they had a clipboard. They were getting the names of people who wanted to be on the mailing list. They had one clipboard. Did you find the second one? Okay. Well, there we go. Problem solved. There you go.
good work, Tom.
Yeah, well.
Was that one of the 3 questions?
No, Laura's got
Okay.
That's a hard question.
Laura, stand up.
I just had a quick question with regard to St. Vincent's. I'm from the East Coast, but because that hospital is closing, is there any way that any of us could help inquire about opening up a homeless hotel? And what I mean by that is, instead of just putting everybody in a washing machine, you go in, you get your clothes, you feed, and you put it back on the street. The homeless hotel in New York City actually has different levels where you go in, you get a shower, you get changed, you get some food, but then on the different floors and the different levels, they actually rehabilitate people and actually help them get back on their feet. So if we have all the, and I drive through downtown all the time, and I see so many abandoned buildings. Is there anything that we can do as local people in our community to help facilitate something gravitating in that direction rather than keeping people in the cycle of being homeless?
Ron?
I agree with you, by the way, that there are a number of these kinds of...
It does exist in New York City. It's
Yeah.
called the Homeless Hotel.
Right, now, by the way, you know, New York is interesting, and I've studied New York actually quite a bit. New York has a so-called right to shelter. And New York has a much larger homeless population than we do, just because they're a much larger city. At the same time, the portion of the population that is unsheltered is significantly lower than it is in Los Angeles. Now, some of that is because of the right to shelter, some of that is because of the weather in New York. At some point, you pretty much gotta go in at some point during the year, or else you may very well not survive. New York has also spent a lot of money to actually pay for hotel rooms for people who are experiencing homelessness, often at very high costs, but at less cost than dealing with the aftermath of homelessness itself. But they've had their own issues and challenges. There's actually one of the most interesting pieces was a piece, I think it was in the New Yorker already, probably about 10 years ago, and it was an article called $1 Million Murray. And they actually followed one guy who was experiencing homelessness over the course of a decade. His name was Murray. And they added up all the costs of everything associated with that one person, in and out of hospitals, emergency rooms, jail, housing, you name it, and it added up to $1 million. And unfortunately, despite all of that, and despite all of the best efforts, and despite an article that was about this man and many people who tried to help him, he died on the street homeless. And so it's a question of how do you use the resources that you have in the best way, and there's not one simple solution. But I do think that we need more places for people to get the clinical help they need, who are not necessarily ready for housing tomorrow, regrettably, but who do need it, but they need it.
Great place
But they
to
need,
start.
in some cases, a hospital setting. And we have to also, and this is a really tough and controversial issue, but we have, look, I remember when I did the homeless count a couple of years ago, and I was talking to one of the outreach workers. They were telling me about a woman that they encountered in the streets of downtown LA at 2 o'clock in the morning. And she was wandering the streets aimlessly, not well, and completely unclothed. They approached her, and because she could really be victimized at any second, they approached her, they finally convinced her to put on some clothes. They asked her if she would go to Facility A, Facility B, Facility C. She refused on all counts. They did not feel that they were empowered to take her in against her own will because she was not adjudged to be an imminent threat to herself, meaning she's not about to kill herself, nor an imminent threat to somebody else. She's not about to kill somebody else. But if that's what your standard is, then you are doing people who are experiencing grave, grave illness a tremendous disservice. Now, you don't want to just pluck people off the street and violate their civil liberties, but you are also doing people no favors by allowing them to die on the street. And so we have to find a better balance.
Okay, so Tom, Patricia Hurst, you have the next question. Patricia? No, you have to read it. This is a new program. You want me to read it for you? Yes. Okay. So you can address her though.
Okay.
She's being a little shy right now with the new hairdo.
Patricia shy?
No. Do you have the numbers already spent on out of the HHA money for administration alone?
So the report that we put out, which was the first comprehensive look of Triple H, actually accounted for every single dollar that was spent. Now, out of the $1.2 billion, at that point we had issued, this was as of a couple months ago, about $160 million of those bonds had been issued, because it's one thing to have the bonding capacity, it's another thing to issue the bonds. And And of that, about 70 some million dollars has been spent. There has not been another bond issue since, although that will probably be happening sometime in the not too distant future. And there has been some additional funds that have been spent. But basically, a fraction of that $1.2 billion has actually been spent at this point. Now, much of it is so-called spoken for, meaning that a variety of different projects have been given a green light. But what does that actually mean? Because these require funding from a variety of different sources, tax credit money, state money, county, there's a lot of different funding sources. So even if we say, hey, we're gonna help to fund our portion of it, it might take another 2 to 3 years before they get the rest of it put together, if they even get it together, which is why I really called into question this whole paradigm of how it is that we are spending this $1.2 billion, because it's taken forever to spend. I don't want to spend it like just for the heck of it in a profligate fashion, but if it's taking you so many years to actually dispense, that's a big problem.
So that's not her question. Her question is, have you looked at the numbers as far as the percentage going toward administrative costs?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we have. And what we found, which was particularly troubling, was that there's a lot of different factors that go into building anything, okay? There's the cost of land. And by the way, when I went into this audit, my expectation was that I would find that one of the biggest portions of creating this homeless housing was land costs. By the way, I was wrong. In the projects that we looked at, only 11% of it was the cost of land, which was shockingly low, actually. What we found was that up to 40% was going for soft costs. That means not construction, that means not materials, that means not labor, that means administrative, that means lobbying, that means attorneys, that means consultants and architects and designers and furnishings and all of that. And you're always going to have a certain element of soft cost, but 40% is way out of whack. Now, part of it, however, is because we have created this paradigm for what we accept and what we approve that takes years. And so you have this inordinate amount of money that gets spent on all of these consulting fees and on lawyer fees. And 40% is just not a way to get anything built. Thank you for that question.
Okay, 40%. Okay, so Leslie Edelman.
I'm an advocate for homelessness, for helping people get out of homelessness. I've done lots of hearings. I worked on a lot of the projects that are being done in this part of the valley. And my concern is how you talk about all these properties that are available. How can we, as the public, get going on them faster so we can recognize them, we can push them through all the places that they need to go through so that properties can be built in a much more timely fashion?
That's a great question in terms of how properties can be built in a much more timely fashion. And by the way, everything involves choices. And let's also be honest with ourselves, okay? We all love the idea of a fire station, but nobody's really anxious to have it next door to them. We all love the idea of a police station, although nobody's anxious to put it right next to them. And by the way, everybody is very, very supportive of housing for those experiencing homelessness or for people who are drug addicted or who are experiencing mental illness. But then if you mention putting it right next door to you, people get a little nervous. And all of a sudden, that excitement about that project begins to evaporate a little bit and sometimes even turn into opposition. And we're going to have to find a way to balance. And what I tell people is that you may not be excited about having certain things in your community, but by the way, guess what? It's already in our community. It just happens to be on the sidewalk. And so how is it that we can put it into a building? Moreover, we all, as community advocates, for example, when something gets built, we want to see it properly landscaped, and we want to see good materials, and we want to see it fit into the community, all of which is great intentions. but all of that adds to the cost of it as well, and adds to the time. And so what I'm recommending, first of all, is that we create a certain series of templates that can be repeated in one site after another. That's number one. Number two, how do we also look at existing properties that can be adapted at a much, much lower cost? You know, for example, I visited a place that is for former prisoners. It's in the sort of Pico Union neighborhood. Former old house. They got redone. There are 20 people living there, and they did it at a fraction of the cost of building something new. And it's actually really nice, and they have an amazing success rate in terms of avoiding recidivism. So we gotta, but right now, by the way, you cannot use AAA money for that. There's a whole bunch of other kinds of sources, federal and others, that you cannot use for those purposes, because they don't necessarily meet every ADA requirement, they don't meet this requirement, they don't meet that requirement. Again, we cannot make the perfect the enemy of the good.
Okay.
So we have one more question. Actually, Marshall Long is going to ask the question, but I'm going to read a question, or a question that we received in an email question. It's on the same breath. Last year, Mayor Garcetti submitted the budget to the City Council. He said last year, being a few months ago, that the city was. He was so proud of the city balanced. He submitted the balanced budget and eliminated the long-term structural deficit, a view that was confirmed by Councilmember Krikorian. A few months later, however, the CEO, the City Administrative Officer, said that the city budget for the current fiscal year was not balanced, but it was about $200 million in the red. And the city was projected a structural deficit over the next 4 years of an estimated $1.2 billion. This is a huge change. A major cause for the swing was the city budget over the next few years was the new labor contracts for police, firefighters, and selected civil workers, where the mayor and city council negotiated increases that were not transparent or subject to public review. So which of these views are correct? Is the mayor's assessment correct, or are we $1.2 billion in the hole? And so, Marshall, you want to ask your question?
Same thing. The figure I saw was $245 million. I think that was for 1 year.
Okay.
All right, let me begin by answering that question just with a little City Budget 101, which is to say that officially, and by the way, a lot of people in the city throw the term around deficit, but officially we do not run a deficit each year. Officially, we have a so-called balanced budget. And I'll explain what that means. We cannot print money the way the federal government can, nor do we issue treasury securities the way that the federal government does. So we don't run a deficit the way that, say, a federal government does. What does that mean? That means that in order to end up with a balance at the end of the year, there's a lot of the things that you end up cutting, and a lot of vital services that may not be realized, or a lot of particularly infrastructure that needs to be addressed that does not get addressed, and that's how you so-called close that gap. The other reality is that nobody loves paying taxes or paying lots of fees. But if you want to keep up with the increasing costs of running any entity, and particularly a government entity, you need to have the resources to do it, and that remains a challenge. There have been an increase of costs, and particularly, as you mentioned, the labor costs. And I'm significantly concerned about that. At the same time, it should be noted that we have a really strong job market in Los Angeles. And what is happening is that, for example, our police officers, there are plenty of other departments that they can go to, and by the way, have less hassle in many cases, and get paid as well, if not better, than at LAPD. And you want to hold on to those people. Same thing is true for our firefighters. And so it is a very complicated issue of how do you give people fair compensation, and at the same time not overcommit yourself. But I am very concerned about the fact that these new contracts that we've entered into do put the city in a really very tight spot for the coming years. And we're going to have to find other ways to generate revenues and or look at other kinds of cuts that can be made. Now, when it comes to, by the way, generating revenue, some of the things that I worked on is how do we actually collect what we're entitled to when it comes to all of those cannabis-related revenues, when right now we have so many of these rogue operators who are not paying their taxes and need to be shut down. I also worked a lot on a thing called SDRF, street damage restoration fees. This is money that's supposed to be paid for by utility companies when they cut into our streets. We used to get $7 million a year. This coming year, we're going to get $70 million a year from those utility companies, which will help to fund our streets. So we have to look at a variety of different new and creative and thoughtful ways to collect revenues in such a way that don't, hit people, but do give us the resources that we need.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ron.
Okay, thank you. How long have you been controller?
I've been controlling things all my life.
Sure. Okay.
6.5 years.
How many years have you been coming to the Sherman Oaks Homeowners Association meetings?
Oh my gosh, probably for 10, 11 years.
Okay.
I was 5 at the time.
No, this is a gentleman that's been involved in this long before he was elected. I remember him or his staff calling when he was not an elected official, wanting to discuss this material. So, thank you.
Thank you so very much. And thank you to my staff, by the way, because all the things that you see here and all the great things that we have on our website and all the work that we do does not happen because of one person. It happens because of wonderful people who are really dedicated. And so I want to express my appreciation to them. Just raise your hand if you're with the Controller's Office. Great. Thank you so much.
Don't go anywhere, please. Before you leave, if you could clean up the tables, that would be helpful. Otherwise, Jules will be here at midnight. But if you have any other questions for Glenn Galperin, come on up.